Ology is a suffix meaning the study of whatever precedes it. Odds are you probably knew that already though. What you may not have known about though is one of the coolest series of books ever printed, the Ology series. These books were incredible. Each one contained a fascinating lore that was always based in our reality and history's myths and legends. However, what made each one so fascinating was that they were always presented in a style that represented a fantastical exaggeration of the world. Some were more clearly fictional, like Dragonology or Wizardology, but some, like Egyptology or Mythology, represented real histories and legends, while others, like Spyology, Alienology, and Vampirology, mixed historical facts with fun, original lore. See, what made these Ology books so fun was that they were more than just fictional educational tools. Each book was written by a unique character whose stories and notes and scribblings littered just about every page through added letters or commentary on what they're reading. These stories and narratives are, in my opinion, some of the most fun and interesting ways to build a narrative and lore that I've ever seen, and definitely inspired how I write my stories. The guides may be telling you about the topic, but it's always up to you as the reader to piece together the side information and story to discover what's really going on. What I want to do in this video is go through each one of the books that I have and recount the stories and information in each one, because I think the books deserve at least that. Let's start with the Dragonology and Monsterology books. Dragonology was definitely the biggest subseries they had. There was the main book, which was the first one written. There was the handbook, a guide on taming dragons that came with a model kit, a series of novels, a field guide, a code writing kit, and its spin-off series, Monsterology, that also came with its own handbook. Dragonology and Monsterology are definitely much lighter on the aforementioned side story aspect. Rather, as two of the earliest books in the series, they focus more on the informational segment and read like ecological textbooks for the fictional beasts that line their pages. You get the classic Latin-style names, as well as information on the creatures' habits and diets. The books even include diagrams on their biology, too. Despite the lack of narrative in the main books, there is still a lot of character to them, specifically the character of Dr. Ernest Drake. Drake is the canonical author to all of the Dragon and Monsterology guides, but in a fun twist on tackling the fictional nature of the book's contents, Drake's writing often comes off like a frustrated and bitter scientist who has had it with his colleagues mocking his pursuits of what is, quote, obviously fake. He even adds anecdotes about how scientists refused to believe that the platypus was real for several years, and how the okapi had only, quote, recently, unquote, been found and would seem just as fictional as dragons. The more fun additions to these books were the added samples of dragon scales or unicorn hair that were included. I definitely read through these two the most as a kid, but for the purposes of this video, there's not much to cover that wouldn't just be me reading the information about the monsters. Next up, Wizardology. Probably the one I read the third most as a kid. Wizardology is an exploration of the arcane across the globe, supposedly written by the great wizard Merlin, well, turned into a tree and then into the book, but I digress. Wizardology is written more like an instruction manual, rather than the textbook style of the Dragonology books. In it, Merlin explains how various magics and spells work, and even provides guides and spells for the reader to attempt themselves. However, Merlin is also very dissuasive in wanting you to practice magic, as it's really hard and you'll probably get bored and quit. Since now is as good a time as any, let's quickly cover the handbooks. These were smaller iterations of their sources that served as both a recap and expansion on a lot of points in the main book. They had almost none of the open up this pouch or feel the scales type of editions, as they were printed on regular pages rather than the thick dual page style of the originals. Thus, there was often far more room for actual writing and more pages to cover more topics. The handbooks I have are both nearly 80 pages as opposed to the 30 or so pages of the main Ology titles. As I said before though, a lot of the handbook's contents are recapping information found in the original, but they do include more examples and stories. Alright, Time for some ancient history. Egyptology and mythology were books that covered the ancient histories and legends of both Egypt and Greece, respectively. These two are also where the stories that made these books so fun began to show up, rather than just being fictional textbooks. I say that, but mythology is canonically just a textbook. But what makes it fun is the tale of a greedy student who was sent to collect Greek artifacts and turn them into a new museum. However, he becomes obsessed with the mythology and begins to worship Zeus for aiding in his search. He soon turns to theft, stealing artifacts from other archaeologists and claiming that Zeus meant for him to keep them safe. He eventually asked for Zeus's blessing that he gave Midas, and, well, I'm sure you can guess how that turned out. Egyptology is the journal of Emily Sands, an amateur Egyptologist who went searching for a potential lost tomb of the god Osiris, under the pretense that perhaps the ancient Egyptian gods were actually real and existed in their own civilization far before even the Egyptians. Otherwise, yeah, these two are pretty much the same information you can get from any other children's book on these topics. Alright, time for the wild stuff. Well, I have very fond memories of reading and rereading Dragonology and Monsterology. I gotta admit that these last three were the ones that easily pulled me in the most today. Vampirology, Spyology, and Alienology are where, of the books I own, the series definitely started to hit its stride. See, mythology and Egyptology and Wizardology, the art just feels like art for the sake of being a picture book. While Dragonology and Monsterology clearly had a defined style, it didn't ooze the very clear visual distinction that I think these last three have. Let's go in canonical chronological order. First, Vampirology, the true history of the fallen ones. Vampirology is a guide on the history of vampires, their powers, how to spot them, and, most importantly, how to kill them. It was written by Archibald Brooks and left to his chosen successor for the role of Protector, Joshua Craik. As you read through it, Craik has included his notes on the horrifying truth he's reading through, as well as his correspondence with a mysterious Italian woman named Magdalena da Amigliani. Craik wrestles with his new reality as well as his growing and unsettling obsession with Magdalena. Ultimately, he seems to accept his new role as Protector and goes to meet with the dangerous woman who had been enveloping his mind. In Spyology, the story of a spy who is stopping Coda... I'm gonna be real with you, this one's really dense. The story requires like a ton of puzzle solving and code cracking, as well as reading everything in the book to fully understand it. Spyology has easily the most information and included notes, letters, pamphlets, and codes. I would say I didn't have the time, but I'm really just lazy and didn't feel like doing this one. But it looks cool and has a lot of real spy stories and information like how to fool a lie detector test. Finally, Alienology. This one has pretty much no story like the others. Going back to the style of Dragonology and Monsterology, this one is pretty much just a textbook. But it is probably the coolest one in my opinion. It details the histories and evolutions of multiple species and their interactions with each other and the Earth. The art is stellar mixes of fascinating diagrams and illustrations of the aliens, beautifully rendered pieces depicting the other planets, and classical ray punk additions to harken back to the era in which the book was written. This book series is incredible. If you are a writer, artist, dungeon master, whatever, if you plan on making a world, I highly recommend picking up some of these books just to peruse through and get inspired. They're probably pretty cheap at this point, and they're well worth the money at full price, so anything less than that is a steal. Oh, and you know how I said Dungeon Master? Well, there just so happens to be a Dungeons & Dragonsology book, and I just so happen to have it right here. So please join me next week as we delve into Dungeonology.